Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in. Today I'm going to go back to some basics. I am actually just going to do a drive and talk today. I haven't done it for a while. In fact, I don't think I've done it since I had the Supra. And for those of you who have been following me long enough know that's kind of how I started this channel. Back when we actually had to drive to go places, I had about an hour and 15-minute commute, and to kind of pass the time, I would just turn on the camera and talk about cars. So today, I kind of wanted to go back to where it all started and do the same thing. Today, I want to talk about the R35. A question I've been getting since I picked it up is, why did you buy it? Why did you buy an R35 GTR? And for those of you who own one, you're probably like, because it's an R35. For those of you who know me or don't know me actually, my history of cars is a little bit more slanted towards the 90s JDM legends. And this is quite a departure from that genre. So I just want to answer that question. Why did I decide to get an R35 GTR? Figured I'd do a quick little rundown of my history of cars. I actually started, my very first car was a 1969 Camaro. In fact, my parents even gave it to me. And so I blame them for my lifelong obsession with going fast. But for me, I was still 16 at the time, and it was a classic car, and it had issues all the time. It was constantly needed to be repaired, and I was not a mechanic really at the time. So I ended up getting rid of the Camaro, and I got a Miata. I know, you guys are probably thinking, I'm nuts. Why the hell would I get rid of a 69 Camaro for a Miata? Well, as I said, couldn't really enjoy the Camaro because I spent a lot of the time in the driveway because it just constantly needed to be repaired. And although I do respect American muscle, they're really only good for straight stretches. And I lived in Oregon at the time, and there was twisty back roads all over the place. And I found I was really being drawn more to a car that could handle twists and turns than just do a 9-second quarter mile. Of course, then Fast and Furious came out, and I'm sure a lot of us hate to admit just how much of an effect Fast and Furious had on us, but it did, and I wanted something with a turbo, and I got a Mitsubishi Eclipse GSX, and boy, that car is just a horribly engineered car, but that is the car where I learned how to work on cars. That's the car where I learned how to turn a wrench. It taught me how to be a mechanic. I learned all the basics for performance cars, you know, about turbos, wastegates, blow-off valves, intercoolers, even fuel management. I learned all that on the Eclipse. Because of the amount of time I had to spend working on that car, in fact, I replaced the engine 3 times on it. It did run 10.8 at Portland National Raceway, though, so I'm a little proud of that. I ended up jumping into a Honda S2000. I absolutely hated that car. I know there's a lot of people out there who love them, but if you want to drive the car hard, it's a horrible car. It's dangerous. Granted, I had an AP1, and I heard a lot of the issues that they had with the AP1, they fixed in the AP2, but I never drove an AP2, so I can't really say anything about that. Of course, that didn't last long. I wanted to get back into a fast car, and I finally picked up my first Supra, which was my dream car, my goal car, what I was fighting for the whole time, and it was worth it. It was a 95 turbo, 6-speed, great car. I did everything I wanted to do that car except for get a decent paint job. It actually ended up being bought off me by some rich guy and shipped to Sweden. It was one of those situations where I was at a gas station and like, holy, is that a Supra? Yes. Do you want to sell it? No. Throw out a price. And I threw out a ridiculous number, and he paid me in cash right there. And I'm like, what the heck just happened? At that time, I was transitioning from being a student to working in Hollywood, so I picked up what I thought was a responsible car, which was a 2010 Camaro. They'd just come out, and God, that was a boring car. So I ended up selling that to some guy, and it went to Japan. So I don't know why my cars keep going out of country. And I got back into a really fun car, probably one of my favorites, and that was a 93 RX-7. I know they get a bad rap, but I never had an issue with that engine. It was an amazing car. It had, you know, it was fast like the Supra, cornered like the Miata. I did a whole video on a review of that car. If you haven't seen it, I will post a banner above my head and leave a link in the description down below. After the RX-7, I needed something with a back seat and a trunk because I was working in Hollywood. I was constantly picking stuff up. So I actually picked up an '89 R32 GTR. I was one of the first 100 people to bring them into the country, so that was really exciting. Of course, I finally get this unicorn of a car. And, you know, I thought it was an okay car. And I'm sure a lot of you are like, what? It's a Skyline. It's awesome. And I think we've built it up to such an extent that it couldn't live up to the expectations. Plus, being one of the first 100 people to own the car, parts for it here in the US were really hard to get. They took a long time because they had to ship from China or Canada. And although the parts weren't expensive, the shipping made them expensive. So anytime something had to be replaced on the car, it cost about $1,000. And it was just kind of nickel and diming me to death because it was a 25-year-old car, which means it was going to need stuff. So I needed something that, you know, I was actually quitting Hollywood. I was going back to school to get a law degree. So I needed a car that I knew would run every day without issue, but would still allow me that freedom to modify. So I did what was logical to me, and I got back into the Supra. To be honest, the Supra was my favorite car. I always regretted selling my first one. It never broke. I could modify it and never have to worry about a thing. So to me, it made sense. I picked up a 93 turbo 6-speed again, and I got a phenomenal deal on it. So I was back into the Supra. Love the car, great car. But one thing I didn't realize is when I had my first Supra, it was only about, 10, 12 years old. Now they're getting 25 to 30 years old. And I was starting to run into the same things that I had with the R32, where things were needing to be refreshed and, replaced. And it was starting to nickel and dime me. Also, I had gotten married. The wife's talking like she wants kids. So I needed something that was a little bit more turnkey and something newer and something that had, the child safety seat hooks. And that's when I started taking a look at the R35. When I decided to sell the Supra, it wasn't like I had to take a look around and figure out, what car kind of fit my taste. I'd actually had an experience with an R35 before. Before I bought the second Supra, I thought about picking up an R35 because they were kind of in the same price range. So I actually found one that was local, and I took it for a test drive, and I remember being so impressed with this car. All the other JDM cars I've owned, they're actually kind of boring until you modify them. They're okay cars. God, there's a lot of bicyclists on this road for no reason. Those JDM Legends, they're in their stock configuration, they're only okay because the gentleman's agreement was running. They're limited to 280 horsepower, but they just have amazing potential when you finally modify and you unlock that potential. So I was impressed with the R35 GTR. I went and test drove one, and for a dead stock car, man, this car is impressive. It's got loads of power, it's super quick, it corners really well, and the power is instantaneous. I mean, I had never been so impressed with a stock car in my life. So it makes sense when I was in a situation where I needed to get rid of the Supra and get into something else, that the R35 came right to the forefront of my thought process. Given my history of cars, then, people wonder, why an R35 GTR? Why not stick with a JDM Legend? Maybe I could have moved on to a 240SX because I never had one, or even an Evo. And for me, I wanted to take a step forward in cars. Now, I can't really say if the Evo or the 240SX is a bad car, but after coming off of something like the 2JZ, which can handle, 800 horsepower relatively easily, taking a step back to a 4-cylinder was something I just didn't want to do, where you're fighting to get 450, maybe 550 horsepower. And to be honest, maybe play around with some new technology. Yes, the JDM cars are legends, and rightfully so for their own reason, but they're also now like 25, 30 years old. Technology has advanced so much since then. And so I didn't want to just hang on to the nostalgia. I wanted to get a car that made sense, that was a performer's car. And of course, when you think of, one of the top performing JDM cars on the street, it's the R35. Another thing that drew me to the R35 was, to be honest, I kind of wanted something with a little bit more reliability. Yes, the Supra, hardly ever breaks, but given the fact that it's starting to show its age, things were needed to be updated and refreshed. you know, like bushings and suspension and, you know, valve stem seals, various other things. I wanted something that if I was working on the car, it wasn't because I had to fix it, it's because I wanted to. And that was part of the reason that drove me to a more modern car instead of staying in the JDM Legend category. When you consider all of those things, the R35 GTR actually makes sense. It's kind of a natural evolution of where it is I'm going, you know? It's still JDM. I think I'm always going to be loyal to my JDMs. I don't ever see myself owning a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, even if I have the means to do so, because it's just not me. Right now, the R35 GTR is really kind of the top rung of what you can get for a Japanese car. So it makes sense, you know, after having those legendary cars, the Supra, the RX-7, the Skyline, it only makes sense to jump into something like the R35. So it's a natural evolution of where it is I'm going. And that's really kind of the cool thing about the GTR, you know, it does kind of feel like my Supra in that it feels like it's got more of an American muscle feel than, you know, a Japanese sports car. You know, it's heavy, but it's fast and powerful. But at the same time, it corners so well. It's almost like my Miata. I go around corners and I don't really worry about my speed. I mean, really, the limit of how this car corners is really the compound of the tires. This car can handle it. This car almost feels like it's all of my history of cars rolled into one car. And on top of that, because it's so new, well, I mean, it's a 2013, so it's not brand new, but compared to what I'm used to, I know this car is pretty much going to fire up for me every single time. And aside from just some standard maintenance, it's not like I'm going to constantly have to be repairing it. So I do feel this is a good buy. And people who don't really like the R35 because they feel it's all computer and mechanical, say that because they really haven't driven one. And there it is. Those are the reasons why I ended up buying the R35 GTR, and I don't regret it at all. I mean, yes, I missed some of the nostalgia that came from those 90s Legends cars and some of the attention I would get, but really, this GTR has everything I want. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Let me know. It does help the channel out a lot. If you want to see more GTR content in the future, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on all forms of social media, which include Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and I'll leave links to those in the description down below. If you have any questions or you feel there's anything I've missed, go ahead and post in the comment section down below. I will respond to you. I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all out on the road.